Somebody was asking me details about you earlier, and I was like,
I don't know. I promise not to embarrass you. Oh no, what's he saying?
It can't be any worse than what I do to myself.
No.
Are we live?
We are live.
Thank you, our producer, Carl. So I guess general announcements, just so everybody knows. Thank you all for coming. If you didn't know, you're here at the Silicon Swamp with us this week. Hopefully, thank you for joining us online as well. You know, Brady, you could probably guess who's watching this week. Brady, Blaine. Yeah, this week we've got a great talk from Paul, who's going to talk to us a little bit about domain-specific languages and his application of them. I don't have any specific announcements. I will say, remember, next week we don't have Silicon Swamp. It is Third Thursday. You are welcome to come. And
Third Thursday is an networking event here for tech and startup folks, and in general, we get to meet other people who are in the community. It's free. They have beer and snacks and stuff.
Absolutely.
It's in the back. If you haven't seen the back yet, you can see the back.
And I think we probably maybe starting the week after, we'll start being in the back.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're working towards. We're going to start using the backspace because it's a little bit.
We're moving on up.
We're moving on up, right? Because we've accomplished so much at the swamp. So just so you guys know, if you come through here and you don't see anybody, we are here. We'll probably post somebody at the door, at least for the first few weeks. But just so you know, and I think next week, not next week, but the week after, it's Brady speaking about web audio and web audio drivers. So it should be a good time. Yeah, exactly. Another world I don't know much about. So we'll hop right into it. Welcome to the Silicon Swamp. We always begin these with our awkward interview section at the beginning. Paul, you're here with us today. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be here.
So what do you do here in Columbia?
So I'm a freelancer, freelance translator. My main job for many years has been translation of Japanese comics and prose into English. But I have gradually been branching out into software development, and I've done some work in that field professionally, but at the moment, still mostly translating. So that's what I do.
And I take it like the languages you translate are mostly like Japanese
I translate
to English?
Japanese to English solely.
Solely?
Yep.
Do you speak any other languages?
I do not.
Oh, man. I'll quiz you a little bit.
Nope, that's just those two.
I don't know any Japanese, except for Domo Arigato, Mr. Roboto.
Well, that's more than nothing.
That's more than nothing. Yes, a truer statement's rarely spoken. So, are you a Columbia native, or where are you?
No, I ended up here because when my wife and I decided to start a family, she wanted to be close to hers, and she's from here originally, or her family's from the area, so we moved close to her folks, and it's worked out really well. So it was really just kind of happenstance of marriage that led me to Columbia, and I wasn't particularly excited nor averse to moving to the South, but to my, I guess, not exactly surprise, but I don't know. I like it a lot more than I thought I would.
Okay.
I thought I would think it was fine, and it turns out I like it a lot. The food in particular is really good.
And where were you before? You were up north?
We've been all over the place. We moved here from New Mexico, which is where I'm from originally.
Okay.
But before that, we were in New York City, which is where we met. Before that, I was in Houston and Honolulu, Hawaii, which is where I went to grad school, and before that, Japan. So
so a little bit of everywhere.
Yeah.
How did you get into Japanese translations?
The same way. It was age inappropriate for me because I'm older than all of them, but the same way anyone under the age of about 35 gets into Japanese. It's because of anime. That's 100% why. But in the mid 90s, that was weird. That was more weird.
Yeah.
It wasn't very much on TV. There's lots to say about that weird generational moment. But yeah, I thought for some reason translation appealed to me. I don't know why. It just somehow it struck me as something that I could do. I didn't know any Japanese at the time, but I thought, well, that's just all you got to do is memorize a bunch of new words, and then you can translate it. That's false, by the way. But I kept. I never thought that I would be able to do it because when I got interested in it, the industry was so small. It was like there were 3 people in the country who translated Japanese comics, and I wasn't one of them already. And obviously, it's not like the industry is about to explode. So, but then it did, and I wound up. And my mom likes to laugh at me because she said, "I think you could probably do that." And I said, "Mom, you don't know anything." She was right.
So what about? So I mean, now I kind of have to ask, like, what are there some like top anime that you would recommend?
I mean,
As an expert in the field.
the one that I always, I mean, like I say anime, but it's really shorthand for anime and manga. I translate my whole professional career has been spent working on comics, which most anime are adaptations of comics. That's where they get most of their material from. So I'm better for comic recommendations than I am for anime recommendations. And for manga, I always, to tech people, I always end up recommending a book that someone in the audience already has, which is Witch Hat Atelier.
Okay.
It's this great fantasy novel with an amazing magic system that's like very programmer logic. It has like visual symbols that interlock, and like the arrangement, like the sort of topological arrangement of the symbols, like it matters. And your ability to do magic basically has to do with how creative you are at like deploying these sigils and writing them down.
Oh, that's cool.
It's really, and it has like a really consistent internal logic. Also, the artist is probably one of the, like from a purely technical perspective, one of the most talented artists working in the medium today. Like she's absolutely incredible. The art is just as good as it gets.
Okay, that's fantastic.
So Witch Hat Atelier, check it out.
Witch Hat Atelier. I don't read a lot of Japanese comics. I do read a fair amount of esoteric American comics.
Oh, all right.
I'm definitely willing to explore. But that's cool. I mean, I guess one of the questions I would also have for you is where do you see that industry heading in the future? Do you think it's going to continue to boom? And
I mean, it's been the only, maybe the only segment of American publishing that has grown continuously since the financial crisis.
Okay.
Every year, the rest of publishing up and down, manga growing, year over year, just continuously.
Cool.
Obviously, that's not going to keep going forever, but it's not going to stop next year either.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of people that are trying to bring over more of the volume. Japan produces an enormous amount of comics every year, and only a small fraction of it gets translated and brought over. And there are always new little startups trying to figure out some way to bring more over in a way that makes financial sense. It is still kind of a hit-driven industry, but it has a better long tail than some segments of publishing. It's certainly not an uninteresting space to be in as a publisher. I think that the workflow could be sped up, which would allow for more volume. And my talk is kind of about like the absolute lowest hanging fruit of some of that speed up.
Yeah.
But I think there's more to be had.
All right. My final question that I kind of like ask everybody is what's some tech, and it can be, but it doesn't have to necessarily be software, that you as a kind of technical member of the community are excited about seeing in the future?
Oh gosh, what am I like specifically excited about? Okay, I think that, so jumping to the end of my thesis here, I think that there are a lot of like niche like applications, like places where you could use software, where people do use software, but they're not using like purpose-built software.
Okay.
And they would be better served by someone writing something for them, like for that specific purpose, but the economics of it don't make sense, or they haven't gotten lucky enough to have a nerd who just wants to do it, which is kind of the position that I'm in. Like, I'm just the nerd who wanted to do this. It hasn't made any economic sense so far. I would love for that to change. However, but you know, I once heard someone describe LLMs as the revenge of the mediocre programmer. And I think that there are a lot of mediocre programmers who are like waiting to serve a community of 1,000 users.
God, I feel so attacked right now.
And like, oh no, I am a mediocre programmer. I'm excited for the possibilities of like, I'm not like, I'm interested to see what people who couldn't build software beyond a certain scale before, but now can, like, what are those people going to do? That's really interesting to me.
All right, absolutely. Well, floor is yours. Carl's going to switch over to your slides for you.
All right.
Do we have a clicker? We do. I'll take the chair so that you don't have to worry about stumbling over it.
I have my notes on my phone, so please
Feel free.
excuse my looking at my phone to read my notes.
Is this the clicker?
That is. Okay. That'd be great. Okay. And should be able to click away.
Can we back up like a couple of slides?
Yeah, I couldn't back up.
Oh, did you turn on it?
No. Did you turn it on? No, I'm a mediocre.
There we go.
There you go. That's for you.
Thank you so much. Just the main. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Paul Starr, and I'm going to talk about Serifu, which is a markup language for comic book strips that I've been developing. And my background, we kind of got into it a little bit. I'm primarily a translator and editor. I've been a translator for, like a professional full-time translator of Japanese comics since about 2008. And I also worked in-house as an editor at both Yen Press and Kodansha USA Comics for a few years before returning to full-time freelance work. So I've been both on the editorial and the sort of freelancer side. I've also done some lettering, although I've never made my bones as a letterer. We're going to get into that. So that's who I am. I've also been kind of a lifelong just technology fan. I never felt like I had the knack for programming, but I was always, I always knew how to do it a little bit. I took a little bit of computer science in college, and Serifu came out of a series of scripts that I was working on to automate things that annoyed me about the repetitive work that I was doing as a translator and an editor. And they kind of, each little script solved like a specific little problem, like numbering pages or numbering panels, or automating some page reversal process in Adobe InDesign. But the problem was like bigger than that, and eventually I realized that if this whole thing were like data already, like if the computer knew like where the you could look at the script and divide it up automatically into like pages and panels and lines of dialogue, that would be better than all of this kind of workaround stuff that I'm doing. And so you don't have to write very much code before your tolerance for repetition pretty much evaporates. And my little automation scripts eventually congealed into this notion that there was a larger problem, which is we should treat these scripts as structured data. And there are some antecedents for this. You might be familiar with a software called Final Draft. It's what basically everybody in Hollywood uses to write screenplays. So that's like a specialized text editor that's dealing with its stuff as data. Scripto is even more specialized. I love this. Has anybody heard of Scripto before? Man, these guys are my idols. Scripto is a software as a service. The software as a service is a tool for writing and managing scripts and creative workflow for late night comedy television only. That's what it does. The Daily Show uses this. The Late Night Show uses it. Stephen Colbert was a big backer. His show uses it. You can look it up. It is laser fit for purpose. It is really good at that. If that's what you're doing, you should be using Scripto. I would love to be the Scripto for mine. Markdown Markdown was an inspiration in terms of the syntax because you look at it and like you get it immediately. It's like, oh, it's like writing an email, but with a little bit more extra rules to make it parsable. I love Markdown. I have great respect for John Gruber, longtime Daring Fireball reader. Magic of Voxel, I don't know if you've heard of Magic of Voxel, only up there as I consider it the platonic ideal of desktop, like sort of end user facing desktop software. It's a voxel modeling and rendering package. It's free, Windows and Mac. It's absolutely incredible. It's like a 2 meg download, and what it does in 2 megabytes is absolutely astonishing. And it's so fast. Basically, if you use Magic of Voxel, it will make you immediately wonder, so my computer's been this fast all along? What's wrong with everything else that runs on it? And I don't have a good answer for that, but Magic of Voxel is my idol. And then IDEs in general. IDEs are unbelievably good. They're astonishingly good. The developer tools that we enjoy as software creators are obscenely good, and they have been for years. And I wanted to make something that would feel that good for somebody else. So the manga translation process consists of translation, lettering, and editing, roughly in that order. Editing kind of oversees the whole thing, but basically the translator gets the book first, they write a script, the script gets handed off to the letterer or the book designer who lays out all the text in the book, styles it, deals with all the fonts. Many letterers do hand lettering, so they like retouch the sound effects out by hand and do the new ones in. So there's considerable artistry involved in lettering. And then the editor has to basically know everything about the book in order to make sure that it's error-free and up to snuff quality-wise. So there are some inefficiencies and liabilities in this process. For example, in translation, the translator has to specify breaks between pages, panels, and bubbles or balloons of dialogue. You have to supply translations for everything that needs to be translated in the book. So this is not just dialogue. This is in-art signs. These are asides, sound effects. Any text that's on the page needs to be translated, and in your translation, you need to indicate somehow to the letterer, this text corresponds to this visual element, which is non-trivial, especially when the the letterer frequently does not speak Japanese, so they can't intuitively map your translation to the document they're working on. You need to make it unambiguously clear without assuming that they're going to be able to figure it out. And then the letterer has to place the text from the script into the page using typically Adobe InDesign. Surely it's not just copying and pasting. Yeah, it's just copying and pasting. It's heartbreaking to watch, frankly. It's so frustrating. And then they have to design the whole rest of the interior of the book. So this means laying out tables of contents, making sure pages are numbered correctly, and remember Japanese comics read the other way, so pages get numbered backwards. One big optimization that I was very proud to introduce was one publisher, they'll remain nameless, was literally laying out their books backwards in InDesign in order to do this. So you would scroll all the way to the end of the document and work backwards. What this means is your pages, like, you can't use InDesign's automatic page lettering because the pages are wrong. And you're just like, it's backwards. But why is it backwards? Because the EN US region version of Adobe InDesign does not expose the feature used to reverse the page direction of the books. You can only do it through the scripting interface. So I wrote a script that literally calls like that one function. And it's like, run this script, book flips itself. And then I wrote another script to like manually reposition all of the pages. Not manually, like automatically move like page 185 to like page 2 and like go through it. And when I showed this to people, they were like, that's really impressive, but we're so used to doing it backwards now. We're not going to change. Like the editor's like, now it feels wrong to do it the other way. Like, but when I moved to a different publisher, I made sure that they did it right. What else? So yes, inefficiency in the lettering process, the endless copy pasting. There's no way to bring style information from the script into the, no reliable way, into the layout. So if you want to specify boldface, you can try bolding the type in Word, but like it's a real roll of the dice as to whether or not that boldface is going to get preserved, especially when frequently it's not as simple as boldface on the layout side, like the InDesign or the letterer will have like a bunch of different gradations of type weights, and you just can't make those kind of assumptions. But it would be really nice for the translator to be able to say, okay, like not necessarily specify fonts, but specify like conceptual styles. Like this is dialogue text, this is caption text, this is sound effect text, and have that somehow come, like have the style, the abstract style information come over into the layout software with the text in a useful way. But there's no, there's no way to do that with copying and pasting. But a computer should be able to help with these things. If only someone had ever used computers to deal with nested data structures. But it turns out that the hierarchical nature of a comic book page sure feels a lot like an abstract syntax tree. You have a page that contains a number of panels, which contains a number of pieces of dialogue, which contain characters, and conceptually, this seems like it ought to be pretty natural for a computer to be able to manage these distinctions. It is, just nobody had bothered to do it yet. And manga is even better because, unlike Western comics, there is a set of subtle but universally applied visual rules that make the panel order of a manga page unambiguously derivable from the layout. There's never any doubt as to which panel is the next to read. It has to do with the fact that there are no four-way intersections in Japanese comics. If you are a Japanese comic artist and you send your editor a layout that has a four-way panel intersection, they will correct it and make you fix it, because the lack of four-way intersections is what allows manga pages in particular to be serialized by the reader, which I find really interesting. So when I started out, I knew that eventually I was going to have to try and figure out or convince somebody else to use this stuff. So it had to be at least not worse than what they were currently doing. And since I'd worked with several publishers at that point, I knew everybody's different style sheets. Every publisher has a different script format they want translators to submit their scripts in. And I had worked with many of them, so I knew all of them. So I figured on average I could make something that at least wasn't worse than those. So to be not worse than what existed, I was going to have a specification for my markup language, a parser for that language, an editor for composing that markup, an Adobe InDesign plugin to ingest that markup. So those four things, and I wrote them in about that order.
So, can I ask?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Maybe I'm not getting something, but what do you do about the visual elements of the rest of the page besides the text? Do you just copy it from the existing Japanese version, or do you have to create?
What do you mean by visual elements besides the text? I can back up to the...
Look at a comic, there's all this stuff.
Sure, well, I mean, the art is already there. We don't need to touch the art. Like, what we have to do is... I don't have a Japanese page as part of this, but like if I were translating this, I would, we'd need to delete the text and then put the target language text in that place. So the only data that we need to worry about from a localization standpoint is stuff that changes. The art is the part that stays the same conceptually.
But then you can't just scan the pages and have something do that automatically. Find the bubbles and remove the text. Translate using Google Translate.
Well, okay, so there are people that are working very hard to make that happen right now. I think some aspects of that automation research are more promising vectors than others. But I was interested in approaching it from what would make the existing workflow faster, as opposed to how can I fire all these people? Because I think maybe you could have a few fewer letterers who are spending more of their time on the artful parts of lettering and less time copying and pasting, and that would be an ideal outcome. We don't need to blank out text because typically the Japanese assets actually arrive with the text removed already, so we don't have to worry about programmatically doing that. Automatically identifying the places in the art where the text should go, that's a really interesting idea, and we'll get to that. So typically, we're getting into like sort of asset politics now. But typically, what a publisher receives now is a high-resolution, 1-bit TIFF image of a page with no text on it. So it would be this page with no text, but notably, the sound effects that are part of the art will still be there. So those have to be treated differently. And the bubbles are part of the art, so those are there. So we know where the text is going to have to go. We just don't know what the text is, or whether the text isn't like, the letterer isn't looking at the Japanese text. They're looking at blank bubbles, basically. They might have access to the Japanese text elsewhere. They're probably via a physical book, but the assets that they receive don't have text that has to be removed. All right, so the markup language was pretty intuitive. I was looking to things like YAML and Markdown as inspirations. Pages are delineated by lines that begin with an octothorpe. 2-page spreads use 2 octothorpes. Panels are lines that begin with a hyphen, and lines of dialogue have an attribution, followed by a colon, followed by the text that goes in the bubble. There are some optimizations that I performed at the behest of a very, very smart friend of mine, Samuel, shout out to you. He lobbied for, and I implemented begrudgingly, only to then use it every day in my own work, source carryover. So in the specification, I wrote it such that if you begin a line just with a colon, it inherits the attribution from the previous line. So you don't have to keep typing the same name over and over again when a character speaks multiple bubbles in a row. It turns out that's a great idea. Samuel, you were right. And then it uses sort of Markdown style emphasis. And there are a couple of conventions for like block formatting. Again, Samuel was like, you should really do block text. I was like, but my whole parser is based on like new lines. If I implement blocks, it's gonna make everything much more difficult. He's like, I really think that you should implement block text. It was really difficult. I did it anyway. Samuel was right. I use it every day. Samuel's normally right, turns out. So that was the idea. Then the syntax looks pretty straightforward. It looks like it does the way it looks, and I'm very proud of that. Conceptual simplicity does not necessarily imply simplicity of implementation. I'm sure this comes as news to nobody in this room. So this is the parser definition, or most of it, for my markup language. It's about 150 lines long, and it's written in Laser, L-E-Z-E-R, which is the parser generator notably used by CodeMirror, which is why I used Laser, because I was writing the whole editor was being written to run in the browser. CodeMirror was the obvious set of browser-based editor building tools. And this is how you write it. Turns out Laser is great, CodeMirror is great. I'm really glad these things are very good, because if they were bad, it would have made my job much worse. CodeMirror is sort of the front-end version of that XKCD comic where like there's the one little thing holding everything up. So many like web-based code tools use CodeMirror as their guts, and it's because it's incredible. And the most recent version, CodeMirror 6, is especially so. It's unbelievably fast. The whole thing runs ruthlessly in O of N. The parser in particular is inspired by what's it called, Tree Sitter, which is another really, if you're a parser nerd, you know about Tree Sitter. It's a very well respected parser generation library. And Tree Sitter's design goal and Laser's design goal likewise was to build parsers that are fast enough to parse large documents on every keystroke. So they have to be really fast, because you might be reparsing the whole thing every time the document changes state at all. So they got to be fast. And it is. It's really fast, and I can take no credit for that. It's all because Laser is really fast. The reason this was worth doing as opposed to just half-assing it with a bunch of regular expressions is because of that speed. I've never had any performance problems, and I paid for that by spending half of my development time debugging the parser. And in fact, Laser is really, it's a very specific, it's a very specialized tool. It's used for building parsers. It takes a parser definition written in its language and some input text, and it gives you a syntax tree. That's all it does. It gives you errors if there are syntax errors in your parser definition, but otherwise, if your definition parses, then on your head be it. So the only error reporting it gives you, and this is kind of the way it has to be, is a specialized node in the parse tree that says there's nothing in the definition that corresponds to the text that I have encountered. So I'm putting an error node to correspond to this range of text and moving on. It's very robust. It will give you some kind of tree for any input text. But if you want to actually look at that tree, you got to write your own tooling. And so I ended up writing a fairly elaborate parser tree visualization tool. Up in the right-hand or the left-hand panel, there's the definition that's being applied to the parser, and then the text it's parsing is in the other panel, and then you can hit parse, and it'll break down the whole thing and show you the tree. And you can't see the text here, but each box has like the complete text that's encapsulated by that node's like character span. So it lets you see with very fine granularity what's going wrong. In the process of writing this little tool, I had to figure out like how to lay the boxes out. And I hit upon this very clever scheme and then realized I'd invented justification. It was like, oh, that's how justification works. Oh, I'm not smart. That's just the way it's been done forever. You could have also written unit tests, Paul. Oh yeah, well, I didn't know what unit tests were, so no, I couldn't, but now I do, and I would have. This was fun. I look back on this fondly. So the editor had to be browser-based because my target user base is so small, we're talking maybe a couple thousand people in the world, that I couldn't afford to divide it up by platform. It wasn't going to work. And I didn't want to write a browser-based text editor from scratch, so CodeMirror. CodeMirror is great. And this is what I ended up with and what I use every day. So the column, despite the slightly fanciful design in the middle, it is still entirely plain text. It has this nice presentation. I think it's kind of cute. I will write dark mode as soon as I have somebody else using it, but I don't use dark mode yet in this because I have been too lazy to add it. And it has all of the features that I really wanted for the sort of proof of concept, which is I wanted it to demonstrate like that a parse was happening. So it keeps track in this list. You can see all of the sources is sort of the list of speakers in the script, and styles are the list of text styles that the translator has specified. And that list right now is kind of non-interactive. It just exists to demonstrate, see, I can easily get a list of all the people who spoke in this comic. If you're an editor who's been editing, you know, an 800 chapter epic with 1,000 characters in it, being able to get a list of which characters appear in what chapters might be really useful. So this might be a pretty impressive demo to the right person. My hope, anyway. This isn't interactive, so I can't demonstrate it, but all of the page and panel numbering happens automatically. There's a keyboard shortcut for like begin a new page, begin a new panel, and it inserts the correct number. If you do that in the middle of the document, it automatically renumbers everything the way it should be. This was really, really exciting for me because I was constantly making off by one errors. And these off by one errors, if you don't catch them, and I never did, they compound themselves, right? Like you make an off by one, if you put 2 page 55s in a 150 page book, there's 150, there's like there's 100 more pages to go, wherein you could make another page number, and by the end of the book, you're off by several. That's no good. Panels, it's the same problem, so it was a huge relief for me to not have to be counting panels and page numbers anymore. And then this little mini map off to the side is kind of a visualization of the structure of each page, and you can see the boxes are divided up into like panels, and the panels have lines in them, and then the little orange dots correspond to sound effects. It's kind of fanciful, but I was translating a porn manga, and you could tell where the sex scenes start because the sound effects get way more dense, and there's lots of orange dots. I thought that was pretty funny. So there are a few fanciful features that you can ask me about later. I wrote an HSL value. I wrote a text to HSL value hashing algorithm to supply the labels, the colors for the labels. There's also a really stupid compression algorithm that I did because I wanted to see if it would work. And that's the editor. And what can I say? I stare at this interface for hours every day because I use it all the time in my translation.
What's paranoia?
Oh, paranoia mode. So this is entirely, it's a good question. So this is entirely, like, whole thing runs in the front end. Like ideally this would be like a hosted app, but right now it runs in the front end, and I don't trust local storage. Paranoia mode generates a download of whatever the current state of the app is and just downloads it every 5 minutes. So like browser crashes, if I screw up and delete the document, like I can only lose so much work. It's odd. I mean, so theoretically, the autosave to local browser storage happens much more frequently than once every 5 minutes. It happens like every 10 seconds or something. But like stuff happens. I have a little mutex issue that sometimes like should not clobber local storage, but sometimes does. And like you can't trust local storage, and I can't trust 10 hours of work to local storage. So that's what paranoia mode is. Yeah. The InDesign plugin I'm super proud of. So this is written for Adobe InDesign. And my goals for it were to show the letterer the text for the page they're looking at in InDesign, let them easily put the text from that page into their layout, and let them let them build associations between styles of text as specified in the script and the styles and fonts they've specified for the document in Adobe InDesign. So in this interface, you can kind of see in the script source, I have like caption, Paul, sign. The letterer can look at that and specify, okay, I'm going to use my caption style for captions, And this is like a style like a paragraph style you would have defined in InDesign that says, use, CC Comic Crazy at 12 point italics for this. And it'll always apply that paragraph style to anything that's labeled a caption without any further ongoing input. Again, this seems kind of like fiddly, but whenever I show this to a letterer, they're like, holy cow. I've lettered a book, and this saves a ton of time. So it made me very happy. And it was, but the part that I was proudest of was really updating the panel to indicate, to show the text for the page that you're on live. So as you can see, this is like an animated GIF. And as I scroll through the document, the text will update to show what part of the script is relevant to that page. And I feel like this is like sort of the perfect encapsulation of the potential of treating a script as data, where you can show someone involved someone involved with using that script, show them exactly what they need to know, exactly when they need to know it, because you have all this intelligence. You know what page corresponds to where in the layout, and you can just do it. And I was really proud of that. It was very rewarding to see that happen. There were some. I was happy that the way I did it turned out to be performant, because it sure didn't feel like it was gonna be. Adobe InDesign is very stingy with the events it exposes to plugin developers. There is not an event that tells you when the currently displayed page has changed. So I'm just polling every 500 milliseconds. So but that's fast enough, and it doesn't seem to slow anything down. So it looks like magic. It's good enough for me. Yeah. So that was this moment in particular was like, oh man, I did it. It works. So the things I want to do next. So demonstrate the usefulness of the parser over a large corpus of text. At this point, I have a series that I've been translating for about 4 years now. I just passed the 200 chapter mark. 200 chapters times 15 pages is well over 1,000 pages. So I would like to come up with some kind of a demo that demonstrates the usefulness of this over that amount of text, and I know that it'll be performant, because that's not a significant amount of text compared to like the processing power of a modern computer, but it's a lot of text for an editor to have to be searching back through. That will need basically a ground-up rewrite of the editor, because the editor was written current editor was written as a functional but bare bones proof of concept, and this one will require like architecture. So that's the first thing I want to do. I think there's a lot of promise in computer vision-based feature identification for panels and text. This is extant in the world. There are papers written by like CS master students in University of Tokyo talking about this. There's a whole corpus called Manga 109 that you can download it. You have to request access to it, but Manga 109 is a collection of 109 different volumes of manga from different eras, all fully annotated with like these XML files that describe bounding boxes for every panel, every character face, every piece of text, and like the full transcription for the text, like really beautifully annotated data, specifically licensed for training machine learning models on. And I think that there's like, the pieces are all there for somebody to put something really useful together. And the last one I'm particularly excited about, algorithmic derivation of text box reading order. The aforementioned non-ambiguity of manga panel layout means that if you can draw bounding boxes around the panels and the pages, or rather the panels and the dialogue balloons, then you wouldn't even have to use machine learning to figure out what the reading order for those boxes is. You could do it algorithmically, like a purely mathematical process, and that would allow you to accomplish this mapping immediately. Because the reason, despite all of these boxes being already present in the layout, there's no guarantee that the order of those boxes as they're represented in Adobe InDesign's document object model corresponds to the order of the script. So you can't just say, oh, I've got 10 boxes and 10 lines of dialogue, boom. You can't make that assumption. But if you could apply those rules, if you could look at the page and apply those rules, then you would be able to make that assumption. And that would mean the letterer doesn't have to do anything that's not like an artistic judgment call, which in my opinion is all they should be doing. Like letterers should be drawing beautiful sound effects, not doing this nonsense. So that's my opinion. And I think it's very possible. My problem is that people are trying to fire everybody. They're just like, can we get a computer to do everything? And it's like, how do you start with doing the most boring stuff and then work our way up to everything? Because probably everything is coming, but we don't have to do that today. And this is more interesting anyway, in my opinion. I am working on this problem. There's a paper, I haven't read it yet. I know it's possible. This is just the limits of my particular ability, but I also think it's a very crunchy, fun algorithm problem to solve. So that's my thesis, or rather, that's what I've been doing. And my thesis is that specialized software like this is worth building. Software that only 1,000 people are ever going to use is worth building, especially if that software is going to make their life a lot better. It's worth building both because it might be economically worth building, but also because it's good. It's good for things to be good. It's better for things to be good than it is for things to be bad. I really believe this. I know that's like a hot take, but I really do believe it. And I think that, yeah, domain-specific software, it really is worth building. And a lot of the best domain-specific software is software building software. Because we programmers always make the best stuff to solve our problems. If regular people knew how much better the software we make for ourselves is than the software we make for them, they would kill us. But it doesn't have to be this way. We could make good software for them too. We could make software for them that's as good as the software that we make for ourselves. And that's what excites me. And I feel like that more people should try to do it. That's what I've been doing. I'm looking for a job. Thank you very much. Also, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah.
So you have three viewers. I don't know what I'm talking about. So do you get the raw text in Japanese as a script that's independent from the page?
No.
So you actually have to look at the page.
Typically,
do you have to strip out the text, or is it on a separate layer?
No. Okay. So you're talking about sort of, there's two different things. So
Yeah.
there are multiple processes here, and the answer to, I will answer all of your questions, and the answer to all of them is the most depressing thing you could imagine.
It's just scanned images, right?
Well, okay. So what I most often work from is literally the book. Like I don't get an electronic version of the document. I have like the paper book.
Yeah.
I gave myself a cervical hernia from staring down too much. So now I take cell phone pictures of each page of the book, crank down the saturation and crank the contrast up and look at them on my computer screen.
Have you tried using OCR to scan the whole thing and get a... OCR
isn't... Yes, and increasingly it's worth doing, but at this point, my Japanese is good enough that I can just read it. I don't typically need to look stuff up, so I just read it.
No, I'm talking about like if you were going to ingest this into a system that would allow you to actually do the markups automatically.
Oh, well, in that case, okay, so what the letterer gets, so you would think, surely the layers, the Japanese version has been laid out. Surely the layers exist. Yes, and good luck getting those assets.
Oh, wow.
It's really hard to get like the layered like Adobe InDesign file. The layered file from the Japanese publication. I have seen that exactly once in my career. Mostly, they just don't give it to you for reasons that are mysterious to me. But even if they did, the typographical necessities, like between Japanese text and English text, means that it might not be as useful as you would want it to be anyway. You might end up not using a bunch of that layout information. And so doing some kind of OCR, ML, computer vision analysis of pages is almost certainly worth doing, even if you did have access to these assets, but you don't. And that's only counting like books that were laid out in a modern process. If you're dealing with a book that was written 20 or 30 years ago, I mean, it was probably done entirely analog to begin with. There are no digital assets. There is no layer. You are going to be removing, like, you are going to be blanking out all the text manually. So, you know, any automation help you could get there would be very useful. Yeah, but the answer is, like, there's some manual work that is unavoidable, and then there's some manual work that is theoretically avoidable, but in practice is almost never avoidable. So yeah, that's, but the thing is, the other problem is that off-the-shelf tools are almost never quite what we need. Like, because the nature of comics and like Japanese to English comic publishing itself is so specialized, like you'll get something that's like 80% of what you need, but the 20% that's not there makes it basically useless, and it wouldn't save you any time at all. Like, there's a reason people are copying and pasting. It's because it's the best alternative, which is sad, but like that's the reality.
Bueller.
Anybody else?
Question?
Have you tried a classifier? Have you tried creating a classifier that just identifies?
No, I don't know. I haven't. I have not. Please tell me how to do feature identification, because I have the corpus.
Ooh.
Yeah, if you like it up, or is it,
No, I mean, you have to ask for it. Like, but like, yeah, it's not like, the thing is, like, it can't be like, my very naive understanding is that it's not as simple as a classifier, because I need to identify multiple features on each page.
yeah.
It's not a question of just
No,
sorting
this would
images
get you there
into.
at least that, but what I'm saying is
Right.
cutting down the workflow.
Right.
You'd still have to have a reviewer that goes in
Right.
and cleans it up.
Right. No, but like getting a first approximation. But yeah, no, like it doesn't need to be perfect. And in fact, like that's the problem with the one fell swoop guys, because what you described earlier, the like click a button, you know, blank out the text, OCR the Japanese, run it through machine translation, lay it out. I've seen a demo of exactly that. It's very impressive. Like, it's sincerely really impressive. And I tried telling him that the most valuable part of what he'd done was identifying the bounding boxes for like the dialogue balloons. Like, and he was like, that was not what he was interested in. It was like, that's like, but
That's a non-trivial computer vision problem.
well, I know. Like, it was a really impressive solution, but like it was meant to like just obviate all the manual work. But the problem is, what you've done is you've given yourself a different problem, which is there are two subtle, glaring errors in this book. Good luck finding them, because everything looks pretty plausible now. And there's like this temptation to just like, oh, I'll just read through this and check it, when it's not. You know, and we're seeing versions of this across the industry now, where people are deploying AI in haste and repenting at leisure. I think it's incredibly exciting the way it could speed up some of this stuff, but people are approaching it from the wrong direction, in my opinion.
I mean, I think that's like an old saying we hear a lot now, which is like, oh, spend 20 seconds generating code with GPT, and then spend 4 hours debugging it.
You would have written it.
But the problem, the nutty thing is, well, it depends on what you're writing. Like, there's a lot of things where it's like, I write it, it gives me a page of code, and then I'm like, this looks really good. And then it doesn't run, and because I didn't program it, I'm like, well, now I got to read all this, and I'm not just going to redo it, right? Because I always think, oh, we're like one variable away, right? I just have to find that one thing. Turns out, like, it's
Yeah, I think
real
it's
subtle.
interesting that like two of the very concrete, immediate, like technical problems that LLMs are good at the most, putatively, potentially good at, is writing code and doing translation. And I guess the question is, do I use translation? Yeah, man, Claude is very good at translating. I don't use it as I'm not submitting Claude translated text, but I use it as like a second opinion on something that I'm struggling with, and I find it extremely useful. One of the reasons I find it useful is because I have over a decade of experience being like, I don't know about that, or like if something doesn't feel right, I can fact check it and get a sense of whether or not it's correct. And if I didn't trust myself to do that, I would be less inclined to rely on them. And I think it's like automation is great until you need somebody to take responsibility. And like doing something in one fell swoop is very rewarding until an artist is furious at you for getting something wrong, and they're gonna pull their contract with you. So, but on the other hand, like it's astonishing the breakthroughs that we've seen recently. So like I think that there's got to be the good version of these tools where we have like machine learning helping us do the boring, slow parts and letting people take responsibility for the difficult judgment calls. And I think comics are a wonderful place to be like having this argument, because a comic book never killed anybody. Comic book never denied anybody
way to
coverage.
put the jinx on it.
A comic book never denied anybody coverage. The worst it ever did was lead someone down a not very profitable career path.
Maybe not just one person.
Oh, also, not that it matters, because I love using AI to help me write code now, but I wrote all this stuff before ChatGPT. Like, I'm very proud of that. Yeah, I guess that's it. Oh, all right. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, please.
So I was surprised when you actually showed the format of the Markdown language that it doesn't, like, obviously the panels and the speech bubbles within them are laid out in a way where there is a defined correct order in which to read them. I'm surprised that that's the same way for caption text. That, like, have you found in using this that there's any situations you've encountered where there's like an ambiguity in the ordering of
Okay, so
caption,
like caption, I mean, like, I guess it's sort of a term of art. Like a caption in this case is like narration. Like if you had like often in American
well,
comics.
Then I guess I'm referring to like the sound effect text.
Okay, so sound effects are indicated by an asterisk, and they do adhere to a kind of notional logic. I should have included more art samples. Let me go back to my art page. There we go. There's only one sound effect on this page. It's great. So like there's a broad flow in Japanese comics they read from right to left and top to bottom. So you're reading approximately diagonally across the page. So it's less, and certainly the panel order is unambiguous. So the only part that's necessarily left as kind of a judgment call is like within a panel, which order do the sound effects come in? And as a matter of practicality, it's typically not, it is, you make a good point. Sound effects can have ambiguous placing. As a matter of practicality, typically it's clear from context which like English sound effect corresponds to which Japanese sound effect. Excuse me. An experienced letterer has kind of an instinct for this. There are exceptions to that. The aforementioned adult manga, there were a lot of sound effects, and a lot of times I've got like a row of like 8 sound effects, and it's like, man, you're gonna have to figure it out. But also, it doesn't matter that much. Like is the difference between squish and squelch in terms of order really crucial? Like, probably not. Typically, you have like only more than 2 or 3 like separate instances of like onomatopoeia are rare in a panel. So as it doesn't usually end up being an issue. But that's a good point, that is the one part that's like not as rigorously orderable as everything else.
So do they have a dedicated background artist just filling in the areas where it's not?
Oh no, that's the letterer's job. So the letter, like so in comics where they're doing full retouching, it's the letterer's job to do that retouch. So there's a considerable amount of like artistic ability and talent that goes into. Not all manga does full retouch. I think it's actually only Viz right now does it as a default, and there's a reason for that. Is that it's incredibly time consuming and therefore expensive. Well, the worst part is that now, with most artists working from a digital process, probably somewhere those layers exist. But getting them has proven very difficult.
Was learning Japanese onomatopoeia difficult?
Yes. Well, because there are a lot of them. Gyongo. There are a lot of them. There are more of them in Japanese than there are in English. There are like sound effect words to describe lots of different. Like it's a more. There's just lots of, like, a lot of adjectives have an onomatopoeic aspect to them in Japanese, and so one of the challenges of translation is like learning what the word for like wiggling, but like a snake, not a worm, is, because it's often not in a dictionary. So you just kind of have to learn it by rote. This is the kind of thing that I struggled with a lot when I'd only been translating for a couple of years. Now, it's fairly rare that I run into a sound effect where I'm like, I have no idea what this means.
Do you do multiple script systems in addition to, or are you just in kanji?
So Japanese, has 3 writing systems that are used simultaneously, 2 phonetic and then the 1 ideographic. And you got to read them all to be able to translate, so I read them all. Yeah. Google Lens is very good. Recently, I've discovered it's remarkably good at doing. I've used OCR to like look up kanji that I don't know for a long time, but it only occurred to me recently to try Google Lens. It's quite good at accurately picking out the character if it's typeset.
Right.
If it's handwritten, you're out of luck.
All right. If that's it, hey, Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Like I said, no Swamp next week, Swamp the week after. Brady's our dude.
Yeah.
It's good, something with web audio, right?
Yeah, something.
All right. Don't oversell it, Brady. Calm down. You're trying to figure out my washing machine?